and Dr. Ajay Singh. Over the last 7 years, SikhRI has focused on community development through programs. Leadership programs developing visionaries. They've trained 5,100 worldwide. Educational seminars stopping misinformation. They have reached 335,000 globally. K-12 services teaching values and language skills. Served 45 schools, 700 teachers, and 2,700 students. Today's webinar is free of charge for all attendees, but not for SikhRI. If you get value out of today's session, I strongly urge you to consider donating through the website at www.sikhri.org. Let us begin today's session. Your presenter today will be Dr. Ajay Singh. Dr. Ajay Singh is a professor of Anatomical Sciences at New York University. He has authored 4 collections of essays on his journey as a Sikh in North America. He serves on the boards of Sikh Research Institute, Sikh Review, and United Sikhs. He has lectured extensively on interfaith issues. Let me briefly review the question and answer protocol. We strongly encourage you to help make today's sessions interactive. 20 minutes into the presentation, you will have the ability to start asking questions pertaining to slides covered. If you have general questions, we urge you to wait until the end of the presentation. In the side panel, please state your name, city, and question. If you'd like to verbally ask your question, please confirm that you have a microphone. Please address all questions to me so I can compile them for Dr. Ajay Singh. Now, I'd like to pass it over to Dr. Ajay Singh to begin today's presentation. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Please hold on for 30 seconds when I transfer it over.
Move the slide over too. Okay, good. Yes. It's Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. This is indeed a privilege and a pleasure to host another webinar for the Sikh Research Institute. It's not the first one that I'm doing. I think perhaps 5th or so over the past few years. And my only wish is that it was more a face-to-face, that I could see you and you could see me as well. And the questioning would be, open. That kind of format, I guess that's not possible at this time. And you will also have noticed that today I have a co-author with me, Surinder Pal Singh. Surinder Pal Singh is a research associate, research scholar with the Sikh Research Institute based in India. But he's a very knowledgeable, very committed Sikh, very knowledgeable Sikh, and a master maven with the computeries and computer things. And without his assistance, this would not have been possible, and I could not have put together this PowerPoint with all the bells and whistles on it. Mine are very simple things when I do. So that's why he's there, and I'm indebted to him for what he did to make it possible. Now, when we talk of Granthis for today and tomorrow, I'm not raising a subject that's new. For as long as I've been around, I think I've heard people talk about it and show their disappointment in the way things are. So what we're talking today about the way things are and the way we would like them to be, and then perhaps how to move from one to the other. And that is really the issue at hand. We have bemoaned the Granthis as they are and what they do or do not do for us over the past many, many years. And let's continue with that. Now, of course, the etymology of the word is simple enough. Sanskrit, a Granth is a large volume, a tome, a large piece of body of work. And a Granthi, therefore, is the one who knows what's in that large volume. He's the keeper, the curator, the reader, and the knower of the tradition. But how do we look at this? Is a Granthi akin to a priest, a minister, a rabbi, or is he something different? What title shall we give him in English? I mean, think for a moment that a Christian goes to a church and the person who ministers to their spiritual needs is a priest or a minister. A Jew talks of a synagogue with a rabbi, and rabbis indeed can only come from certain castes within Judaism. Not everybody can aim to be a rabbi, not in the Orthodox and conservative traditions. For a Muslim, the masjid or mosque is the place of worship, and imam is the man to handle it. And the Hindus speak of a mandir, and with a pandit or a purohit who is a Brahmin by caste. Sikhs don't have those things. Nevertheless, what do we speak of as Sikhs? And I have, in this country, heard and seen and read about people, Sikhs writing about a Sikh church. So the Gurdwara becomes a church or a Sikh temple. And without fail, I have seen the officiant in the Gurdwara referred to as the Sikh priest, and I've seen that in writings as well. Is he really like a priest or a minister? Think for a moment. Historically, a Sikh preacher was called a bhai. Literally, a bhai is a brother, which I think is a very fine title. Or, historically, called a Granthi. A Granthi would be then the curator of the Guru Granth, which is the living word for us. In English, a rabbi remains a rabbi. An imam does not morph into something else. He's still an imam, and a pandit remains a purohit or a pandit. It seems to me, therefore, that Granthi is more accurate, with no need for an English translation. Yes, non-Sikhs now do not know that, but with familiarity, with time and usage, they will learn the meaning of the word Gurdwara as well as the Granthi, and a little patience would do it. But who is a Granthi? Anyone who is significantly knowledgeable about Guru Granth Sahib that we appoint to that position. He must be active in the community in which he or she lives, and I said he or she, but can she be a Granthi? We'll talk about that. An interpreter of Sikh doctrine, history, culture, exemplar of the values inspired by the interpretations of what's in the Guru Granth. A Granthi is not a priest. A priest has in the Christian church certain ecclesiastical authority that I will talk about later. We do not have that. Not the only medium to get you to Guru or Vaheguru, can be helpful, not indispensable for that. The journey starts with 1604. 1604 is when Guru Arjan compiled the precursor of the Guru Granth, not the Guru Granth, but the precursor in 1604, and installed it in the Harmandir, in the Darbar Sahib, what became the Golden Temple in Amritsar. And he also appointed Baba Buddha to take care of the Guru Granth. And thus, I suppose Baba Buddha was the first Granthi. The 10th Guru Gobind Singh sent several Sikhs to centers of Vedic philosophy in India. And of course, one must recognize that Sikhism arose within the Indian culture where the dominant religion was Hindu and the politically dominant people were Muslims. So the teachings of the Guru Granth had to be cast in the language, in the context, and the culture and the times of the Hindu and Islamic faiths that were around us. And so the Guru sent several Sikhs to the centers of Vedic philosophy, and they came back and formed the nucleus of the first Granthis. They were well versed in both Gurmat and other religious traditions of the times and the place, and that's what we needed. So now the question is, between the Granthi that we have and the Granthi that we need, although we do have some very erudite Granthis, but between the Granthi that we have and the Granthi that we need, there is a certain gap. We seem to have slipped a mite, as we can see from the complaints we always have about the Granthis, how irrelevant they are to our lives. Now, why is that so? Partially, many things have gotten into Sikh teaching and Sikh practices that came from the impact of Hinduism around us. Don't forget that we live as a drop in an ocean of Hinduism around us. And therefore, Hinduism has impacted what we teach, or what we preach, and how we live. And of course, much of the lexicon and the context, cultural context in which Sikhism arose was Hindu, and therefore plenty of Hindu references exist in the Guru Granth. That does not mean that it's teaching Hinduism. The other, of course, impacting, and I should add here, Hinduism was around us, and that's impacted us. Don't forget, now when we live outside India, outside Punjab here, the issues are different. The past 2 centuries in India also saw the allure of the West and what it offers us. Don't forget that India was under the British for 200 years until it became independent in 1947. Punjab and the Sikhs were under the British, influenced by them for 100 years. But Punjabis and Sikhs are a very pragmatic, very practical people. When the British came, they realized that material progress would now depend upon how they understand, how the Punjabis and Sikhs will understand the Western values and technology and language and culture and the ways of working. And of course, what further facilitated that interaction was the fact that the British were very happy to have Sikhs in the army, and at one time, about 40% of the Indian Armed Services, the officer corps of the Indian Armed Services was Sikh. So they were westernized very quickly. Yet they were very deeply attached to Sikhism, so they kept the connection, the cultural connection to Sikhism. The spiritual, religious connection often got diminished, likely to be. There was a time when in the village the only educated person, if not the only one, certainly the best educated person, was the Granthi. Now came the time that what the Granthi could do and the Gurdwara could offer became second place, or to occupy second place. So we therefore diminished our own tradition, our own culture, and our own institutions. And that has continued to today. What do Granthis need to operate outside India? Now, why do we need to have them operate outside India? It's very simple. If you look at our society, many millions of Sikhs now live outside Punjab and outside India, particularly in the Western world. Now we have quite a large presence that they have. And the Granthi therefore needs command of the local language. Of course he needs the command of the Vedic and Semitic learning to interpret what's in the Guru Granth. But the local language he must know to translate it, to present it to us, to teach us. And you must realize that much as in India we were a drop in the ocean of Hindu culture and tradition, out here we are a drop in an ocean of Judeo-Christian background. So for interpretation of and the application of the teaching, we need some understanding of the Judeo-Christian background of our neighbors, and we require that. And the Granthi needs to know that in order to speak to us. And I could give you many examples of how that will impact on us, but I can't do it in this presentation today. Now, I could argue that Sikhs really have no priestly class. And that perhaps doesn't help us in some ways, because then there's a certain fear of institutionalizing the Granthi, and we are not quite sympathetic to that idea either. So we have a very conflicted relationship with the Granthi at the Gurdwara. One way we like him because he can present to us things that we can barely read or understand. Yet he presents them in a way that we don't find particularly relevant. He connects them to the Hindu culture and the traditions of India 100 years ago, several hundred years ago. That's not what we need. And we don't want to institutionalize a system of Granthis when we realize that this is not mandated in Sikhism to have one. Granthi can be any person, and we'll come to that in a moment. Yet a person dedicated to learning and teaching SikhRI is needed, and of course he needs to be paid. Religious learning is a trade, just as another profession. He or she too has a family to support and life to live, food on the table. Yet what we have is Granthis who are undercompensated, poorly treated, much like a gopher. Now, we often think of them as uneducated. They are not really uneducated. They are educated but in a very different tradition. They are educated in the Indian cultural tradition, the Indian mythology, and in the lexicon of the Guru Granth, and that they are educated in. But they are not educated to communicate with us very effectively. So they are treated like a gopher, to clean the place as well as to give katha, vyakhya. although there are some preachers who make millions who do very well. Now, Sikhism does not recommend to celebrate Granthi, much as a Roman Catholic priest must be. Family life is recommended for the Sikh. Ecclesiastical authority is granted to the Roman Catholic clergy, not to a Sikh Granthi. The respect that a Granthi gets does not come with a title, it has to be earned. His expositions are recommendations at best, not edicts. They're commentaries on Sikh scriptures. They must connect us to life. Often lessons of history are applied to contemporary life situations, but that's in theory, not in practice very much. A Granthi never speaks ex cathedra, no matter how important the subject, how strongly he or she may feel about it, or how venerated he or she may be. When I say speak ex cathedra, can't do it. What I am talking about, I'm thinking of, is that in the Roman Catholic Church, the Pope, when he speaks from the chair of St. Peter, ex cathedra, on matters of faith and morals, his words are binding on every believer. Every believer must agree to remain in a state of grace. Otherwise, the sacraments of the church can be withheld from a person. And that is the kind of authority that a priest also has. For example, if one has been divorced and you want to remarry within the Catholic Church, that would not be allowed unless the first marriage was annulled. Annulled means the marriage never occurred, even if you have 5 kids. And then you might be allowed to marry within the church. And if you have not been to confession for a certain time, you may not receive communion. And this would be like saying in a Gurdwara that you may not receive prasad because you're not living the good life of a Sikh, and that would never happen. So these are the kind of rights that a priest has, but a Granthi does not. Now, anyone may disagree with a Granthi or engage him or her in debate and discussion. Now, that's my view. I don't think many Granthis would like that or would agree with it. Many Gurdwara managers would not agree with it. A Granthi serves at the pleasure of the congregation and management, and that is true. A Granthi serves at the pleasure of the congregation and the management. There are some gender issues we need to not ignore. There are no women Granthis that I have seen. Perhaps I've heard of one or two, never come across any. But that is custom, not canon, not law. Sikhism provided us an equal place. We just haven't delivered it culturally. But I think this discriminatory policy arose from the influence of Hinduism and Islam, where women are not allowed as functionaries in either the temple or the mosque. And you know that the management of the Golden Temple, Darbar Sahib at Amritsar, would not allow any woman to sing within the inner sanctum, since none had by tradition. There was a one-time exception. In the 70s, I think one group of young women from America, American converts to Sikhism, the Yogi Bhajan's group, went to Punjab and they were given permission to sing once. It's never happened again. The issue is under discussion. Women protested. It was taken over by a committee, and the committee, I guess, has not yet found the time to decide, or the wisdom. We forget that when Guru Amar Das appointed as many as 22 manjis or diocesan authority, places of authority, about 22 of them to spread the message of Sikhism across the country, there were many women in that. I've heard of 8. There may have been more, but certainly 8 women out of the 22 were Sikhs and Sikh women. Now, there is in reality no Sikh service that is out of bounds for a Sikh woman. We also have the Indian character trait of thinking that to be a good Granthi, you've got to be grey-bearded and not too young, and that wisdom comes with age. And I'm living proof of the fact that that's not true. My beard is all grey, but wisdom I still await. I remember that a newly established Gurdwara in New York interviewed Granthis, a promising young man fluent in Punjabi and English, was rejected. He was too young. in the Gurdwara found in Liv-Granthis. I'm reminded of an incident with John Kennedy in 1960 when he was a candidate for presidency. And at one public meeting in Virginia, he was accused of being too young to be the president. He said, you know, I know that politicians make promises that they never keep, that they break. I promise you today, I promise you one thing, and I promise that I never will break that promise. If you elect me the president, I never will be that young again. We need to remember that. Our Granthis usually migrate from Punjab. They're schooled only in Punjabi. Their education is limited to knowledge of Sikh, Hinduism, and Islam to a degree. Familiarity with history is rudimentary. Sermons are overlaid with hefty dose of mythology and folk tales, entertaining but confusing mix. And they have really no understanding of interfaith issues with the other Judaic religions, you know, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Judaism and Christianity surround us here. They have no understanding of how to have a conversation with them. They are not capable of representing Sikhism to Sikhs, not capable of representing Sikhism to non-Sikhs. Now, why did I say not capable of representing Sikhism to Sikhs? Because, you know, if you look at the over 200 Gurdwaras that we have, they really function like Gurdwaras do in India. The Granthi is from India, and the Gurdwara functions exactly that way. You see, for the immigrant generation that keeps coming and will keep coming in the foreseeable future, that is the model Gurdwara that they need. That is the model Granthi that they need. He talks to them the language that they had in India, and that works very well. And but we have a new generation of Sikhs here, born or raised here, and an understanding of the fact that the environment is different, the people around us are different here. And they need a different kind of a Gurdwara, not one that captures the sights, sounds, smells of home in India. Our home is different here. So are the sights, sounds, and smells. And to non-Sikhs, of course, they do not speak. Now, so what the Granthis say are only marginally relevant to the lives of young Sikhs. Should I pause for this? Huh? I am told by my friend across, my expert on computers, that there's a question from the attendees. And let's have the question right now before we go any further.
Uncle Vaigaji Khalsa Vajfate. This question is from Amrik Bhamra from UK, from Salisbury, UK. How do we continually dispel corrosive Hindu influence? This seems to be the main issue today.
No, not quite. Well, it's not quite the main issue today, but you're right, it's one of the fundamentals. And let me address this one a little bit later.
Okay. He also asks, Uncle, real quick, that perhaps the concept of revolutionary Granthi, rather like the Mao's foot soldiers, is what is needed. And could SikhRI play a role in preparing a new breed of Granthis, men or women?
Let me get to that also. Where are we going to? So far, I've just been talking about the ills of our system as it exists. Now, the next part we'll talk about what can we do about it, and then we will try to do that. And please don't forget not just the question, but your comments. Obviously, you have things in mind. I'd like to listen to that too. Okay. Now, I just want to point out that the older generation being on similar teachings in India can perhaps be somewhat comfortable, but most young Sikhs cannot. And we do not confide in Granthis about personal matters. And one of the roles that I see of a minister or a priest or a Granthi is to be a sensitive counsel. So we need to get the Granthis who get out of the Gurdwara walls to be a friend and a guide, the pivot which holds the community together, and to be at home in the Gurdwaras as well as on the golf course and tennis court. Whether we take our lead from Mao or somewhere else, we will leave. We need a Granthi who can address global issues. For example, matters of domestic conflict, environmental issues, dowry, AIDS, bioethical issues, and cloning, and God knows what else, and human rights and disarmament. When was the last time you heard something like this in a Gurdwara? Now, a Granthi need not be an expert. No one man will be an expert in all these matters, but a Granthi has to be aware of them. He has to provide the ambience and direction for such matters to be freely discussed. And I will tell you that a discussion in a spiritual ambience will not lead us astray, will enrich us instead. I know that people say, oh, we can't have a discussion in the Gurdwara. That is disrespect to the Guru. I would say to you, it's disrespect to the Guru not to have the discussion in the Gurdwara. The greatest disrespect will be not to discuss matters that matter to us. Now, how we discuss, there are rules to a civil dialogue. And as intelligent people, we should follow those rules. Even Guru Granth tells you, Hoye katra milo mere pai, dubida dur karo liv lai. Get together and talk about issues of doubt, conflict. And where are you going to do it except in the Gurdwara? So the Granthi has to be a model Sikh exemplifying in teaching and understanding Gurbani history and traditions, has to be technologically savvy, continuously self-educating, aware of political, cultural, spiritual, social realities that keep changing in a new world. They are not what they were 300 years ago. They were not what they were 100 years ago. They will not be what they are 50 years later. To mediate and counsel. And he has to know the languages, Punjabi, the local language, and English. Presentation skills are necessary. A role in interfaith matters. He has to represent competently and successfully. You know, if a court or somebody from the press calls us or somebody in the community and says we need somebody to come and speak to us, we don't have somebody to send who's an expert. The burden falls on amateurs like us. The Granthi is not competent to handle that. I would like the Granthi to be at home in the library, in the Gurdwara, in the golf course, and the tennis court as well. So you can make the teaching of Sikhism come alive to the needs of today and tomorrow and create an environment where rebellious questioning is not deemed blasphemy. He needs funds at his discretion, authority and the ability to speak, respect from the Sangat, resources to do his job, education training, clearly defined role, not being both the sweeper and the Vyakhya at the Gurdwara, and adequate compensation, living space, health, other benefits. Again, I'll say not a gopher. And a platform for Granthis to get together for interaction and mutual education, much as we do in our professional education. We need a change in the Granthi management relationship. We need a change in the Granthi Sangat interaction and expectation. Change in the Sangat management interaction. It's not that a Granthi comes and speaks and we say, yes, sir, here's my dollar, and go home. We need a change in the gender stereotypes. Introduce or develop material for education plans, assessment programs, set up funds for Granthi empowerment, training programs for Granthis and academy. These things are not done in a day. They will take a generation or more. You know, we have all worked in life somewhere or another. We've hired people, we've been hired. And what do we get? There's usually a job description, what is expected of us. A written job description you get to tell you what is expected of you. And you get evaluation, maybe every 3 months or 6 months or a year later or whatever. There's an evaluation with your boss and you sit down to talk about where you are and where you ought to be going. I have never heard anything like this for a Granthi. I've never heard of any written down selection criteria, qualifications, or a job description. So between the Granthi we have and the Granthi we need, I offer you an interim program. An interim program. Because we do have a sort of a schizoid community. We have a community that comes from India. They still want the Gurdwara and the Granthi as they know it from India. And we have a large growing community which needs some transformation that we talk about. And we all know. It's Granthi we need and the Granthi we have. Now, I suggest, in the meantime, what we should do is continue in most Gurdwaras with the Granthi we have, but not just that alone, because that doesn't work. Have, in addition, an assistant or an associate Granthi for extramural programs and activities. A man who's at home in this society, is knowledgeable about this world, is knowledgeable about the Judeo-Christian background around us, is knowledgeable in the language and the culture of this society, and can represent us, can speak to us and speak with us and speak for us, who can address our unmet needs of today and tomorrow. An associate Granthi. And then perhaps both generations could be satisfied for the next several years, and then we'll see where we are. I don't think there's any Gurdwara that has it. And I think if there was a Gurdwara that had a program of this kind, people like me would join the heartbeat. Now, a Granthi does not hold the keys of heaven in his hot little hands. And this slide was made when the program, when this webinar was planned for, and that was in October. And October was Clergy Appreciation Month. It is also Teacher Appreciation Month all over the United States, and the Granthi is a teacher and clergy to some degree. And we have moved to December, but I could not let go of that slide. So I will leave this now. I thank you very much for your patience, and I hope that we have time for discussion. Now, if you have other questions, and if you will repeat the ones we have, perhaps we can attend to these as well.
Uncle, let me repeat the questions that Amrik Pamra from Salisbury, UK had asked.
Yes.
He said, how can we continually dispel corrosive Hindu influence? And he seems to think this is the main issue today. He also says, remember McCall's life's message, do you not think we need to have intellectual strength to punch above our weight? And maybe the concept of revolutionary Granthi, rather like the Mao's foot soldiers, is what is needed.
Well, I agree with the revolutionary Granthi, but as I said, the community has needs that both need to be satisfied. We have a schizoid bifid community, bifid needs. And of course, when I'm looking for that associate Granthi as an interim solution, I am looking for a revolutionary mind, and I'm looking for a revolutionary change in the way Gurdwaras function. Now, as far as the Hindu influence is concerned, I have no doubt that lies at the fundamentals of our issues, because our cultural practices and our behavior and our lexicon often is derived from the culture around us. And here our needs are different. And here we will be impacted by the Judeo-Christian heritage and people that are around us. And of course, the Guru Granth was composed and written and compiled at a time and in the context. Don't forget culture in the context of time when it was compiled. And much of the language in it does come from the existing culture. I mean, religions do not arrive de novo. They must teach in the language of the people. And therefore it taught in the language of the people, which was grounded in Hindu Indian mythology. And people are very resistant to revolutionary change. Evolutionary change occurs. Revolutionary change is a little uncomfortable for most people. Now, I look at the fact that Guru Nanak's message was revolutionary. But if I look at the development of Sikhism, from Guru Nanak's message to Guru Gobind Singh's message, which took 10 generations and over 200 years, I look at it as more of an evolution. Not the time span that evolution will take, Darwinian evolution will take, which might be hundreds of thousands of years, but even 200 years is an evolutionary change. So that does occur. Our problem now is, as I said, we have diminished our own institutions, our own teachings. We have got a generation of Sikhs now from the past 100 years now, increasingly isolated and disconnected from the teachings and the meaning of Guru Granth. And we have become sort of cultural Sikhs. And that needs to change. We need to get away from the model of a Gyani or a Granthi who comes and gives us 45 minutes of Katha that half the people will not understand and the other half the people would ignore pretty much. And I will guarantee you that what I say is not true. Ask people who are coming out of the Gurdwara, what was the Katha today? What was the topic of the sermon? And I'd be willing to bet that not more than a handful will remember what the topic was, much less the content. And that doesn't really answer your questions. It merely says that these are matters that require more than a revolution. They cannot be changed in less than a generation, not very easily. Even the idea of an interim associate Granthi who can handle things is not easily accommodated by most Gurdwaras. They are uncomfortable with it, but that does not mean that we should not have it. The idea of a discussion within a Gurdwara, most Gurdwaras reject. That does not mean we should not do it. To me, the Guru Granth teaches that this is how people talk to the Guru 500 years ago. This is the way we should talk to each other and to the Gurus today. I could give you another long lecture for an hour on it, but I don't think I'd get any closer to a solution. That has to come from you.
Thank you, Uncle. There's a follow-up question from Reek. Maybe how is SikhRI playing a role in preparing this new breed of Granthis, men or women?
There are two issues here. I would go a step further back. How is SikhRI planning a role or doing something about it? We have to prepare not just a new breed of Granthi, we have to produce a student who's willing to listen. I can hire the faculty for what I teach, very knowledgeable faculty, and if the student is not prepared to listen, it's not going to help any. So the student has to do his work as well. Much of the work is our working with the grassroots of the Sikh community. And the Sikh Research Institute, SikhRI, is doing that wonderfully well. They've prepared the fundamentals of teaching Sikhi. Now, I don't know if many Granthis have embraced that. Some schools in some Gurdwaras have successfully embraced the technology and the method and a very modern way of teaching Sikhi, of Sikh history, Sikh tradition, Guru Granth's teachings as well. And the model does exist. It needs to flower. We need to practice it. We need to support it. We need to support it. And you'd be amazed at some of the absolutely nitpicking criticism that comes sometimes, the way of SikhRI, what they're trying to do. Grudging support and nitpicking common data. So we need to do that. Unless we learn to do our homework ourselves too, no Granthi can convert us, transform us to a better Sikh. No student can graduate to an Ivy League school unless he learns to do his homework as well. No professor can pour knowledge into a student. If so, the students are bottomless and nothing will stick there. I should close this question by giving one silly example. I use it many times when I teach students anatomy. I tell them that my first lecture, I tell them, I'm not here to teach you anatomy. I'm not here really to teach you anything. And they're a little surprised and say, what do you mean? I say, well, you know, you're not bottomless buckets. I can't pour information into you. All I can do is to make it possible for you to learn what your talents and inclinations allow. And that's what a good Granthi can do. Make it possible for you to learn what your talents and inclinations allow, and to represent us well. He can do that, but he cannot make us better Sikhs unless we try.
Thank you, Uncle. Next question from Amar.
I should warn you, Jasdeep, that I never give straight answers. I never have done that anywhere in my teaching.
I'm sure that warning is now out to everybody who's attending the webinar. The next question actually comes from Amar Sandhu. Uncle, you forgot the knowledge and skill of politics that go with a Granthi's job in the Gurdwara. Since the Sangha structure elected managers of the Gurdwara day-to-day, which have day-to-day operations, it's very confrontational and short-sighted. Would you have any comments to that?
You know, politics really is necessary. This is the interaction of humans. There are two humans living together, there's going to be some politics. And in large bodies, always so. I have worked in large institutions, universities and so on, and you'd be amazed at the politics that governs universities as well. Knowledge is what we trade in, and knowledge is the goal, but the politics is the way that is done. the lubricant of that process in many ways. So the Granthi has, I didn't mention it because that is inevitable in any human relations. The Granthis have to know their own competence, their own goals, and they're limited by their own ability to work with people. The interaction with human nature. The managers of the Gurdwara need to know their own limitations. Their desires to be better Sikhs, their desire to create a Sikh institution which is of service to the community, and their own limitations in it because they are lay people with a modicum of information, perhaps some half of it is wrong, and only, as I said, cultural Sikhs in many ways. So one has to know oneself to some degree. What do I want to do and why am I doing it? And our managers are not really that clear-headed. Often we carry models of Sikhi that we learnt by osmosis in India. Osmosis. Here we have to learn Sikhi by, as they say when things get into cells, either by osmosis or by active transport. Here we have to learn by active transport against a concentration gradient. It's an active process. And that's what we need to do. The managers need to do that well. The managers have no business interfering in the translation very much because they don't know very much. And they have to approach that way. The Granthis have no business interfering in how funding is done and fundraising is done. The managers have no business telling the Granthi, you will not speak about the case or the 5 Ks in the Gurdwara. They have no business saying that. The teaching of Sikhism is the domain of the Granthi. But the Granthi has to be first with the background that we're talking about. Otherwise, he's irrelevant, as most of them are, irrelevant to most people.
Thank you, Uncle. Another question from Harmeet Singh from New York. One of the major issues we have is that there is no standardization of the Sikhi concepts or Sikh concepts in the Gurdwara, which leads to a lot of confusion in the community. What could be done to make this more standardized?
I agree. Interesting question. You know, a lot of things, how shall I put it? There is a standard version of what it should be, and that's in the Sikh Rath Maryada. Now, the Rath Maryada may or may not be perfect. Some parts of it may want to be rewritten or need to be rewritten. That's a different matter altogether. No constitution is ever perfect. But any community, a state, whether it's a political entity or a larger community, even a family, is run by certain requirements. You can call it a Rath Maryada, you can call it a constitution. Every community has them. So do we. It was done at a great cost, at a great effort. And the history is a long one, but not for today. Now, what you do, even if you wish to change the constitution, you work with what you've got. You work with what you got and you slowly work to amend it. And that one can do. But there is, in the meantime, a fairly comprehensive system by which we can have a fairly uniform policy of how we run our Gurdwaras. But of course, if we bring to with ourselves the kind of Sikhi we learnt in a family, as I said, as osmosis, we did what everybody else around us did unthinkingly. That's osmosis. And that's what we got. The different versions are not going to agree of all the people, and there are going to be problems. But we could work with the Rath Maryada very well. The version does exist. Our ego doesn't allow us to live with them. And I don't know, I think I've gone through 4 or 5 questions and I've talked about around the rose bush. Because many of these questions are very thoughtful questions. Many of the answers will take us a lifetime to work through. That's why I said that some of the issues that face us cannot be done in a day, cannot be handled in a day or a month. It'll take a generation. The fact that you're asking the questions tells me that you are on the way to progress. You're pointing the right way. The fact that you have the questions tells me that the way is clear. And we'll get there. Not today, not tomorrow, but don't let go of the questions. The answers will not always be what I say. The answers will come. Next.
Thank you, Uncle. This question is from Ravinder Singh from Columbus, Ohio. Do you think we have enough people around us who can qualify as assistant Granthis, or who may be interested in becoming assistant Granthis? And he goes ahead and
Yes.
okay.
Okay, I would give a very short answer to that. I think I know Ravinder, this Ravinder from Columbus. And Ravinder, between you and I, we have two already. All right. There are many, many, many. Jasdeep Singh right here who's talking to us. There are many. The point is many more will evolve. We have to first embrace a model. We have to start thinking about these things. We have to start thinking about it, and then things will grow. And there'll be better ones than you and I. But we have at least something to start with. And there was another question from Ravinder, I think. There's more to the question?
No, he was just saying that if he can count 10, that would be a start.
Well, I would say if you can count 5, let's go. If you count 1, let's start. Every minority opinion, every good opinion starts with 1. Really. You got to start with something. There was a time when there was only 1 Gurdwara in this country. I remember the day. And no Granthi. Right. I know Gurdwaras that run without Granthis, 1 at least in Buffalo. I know 1 Granthi at least in Maryland area who mixes very well, who's learnt English here, who's taken classes in counseling. He mixes with the community very well, has a very good place with young people, and plays with them basketball fairly routinely. And we need those kind. We have 1. More will come. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Uncle. I think if there's one question from Gurmail Singh from Penang, Malaysia, if I can maybe interpret the question or help you understand, he's talking about maybe when you have an Akhand Path Sahib at home, people sometimes put, coconuts or pitcher of waters, maybe in a diva or something like that around it. And if I can understand his question, he's saying, please quote references where this can be explained to the Sangat. Maybe he's talking about how Granthis may preach these rituals at certain places in your comments, or maybe even how Guru Granth Sahib interprets or says or tells us what to do and what not to do.
This is a loaded question, and it would go on forever and ever, but let's look at it. Guru Granth tells me, Ditthe mukt na hoi jichar sabad na kare vichar. It's not the sight, it's the thinking, the analysis, making it a part of your life, integrating it with your life. Many of these practices that have come, they have come to us from this culture around us, the Hindu culture. The coconut here and the water there, and you put a glass of water for the langar as well, and you think that's going to become Amrit by the words. The magic really is not in the word. The magic is within you. The change of the heart is more important. The change of the mind of the listener is the most important thing. That is where the pilgrimage is. That's where these rituals and things become unnecessary. So I am not sure that they contribute to anything, but it's somewhat like, we are tied to rituals. Sometimes they are empty, but we look at what the culture around us does, and so we do. The Karwa Chauth by many women, fasting, same sort of a thing. The Christmas tree. I remember when my daughter was very little, she was 3 years old here, and she wanted a Christmas tree. So what was I going to do? And at that time my wife was not a Sikh. And so what I did, of course, was I put up a Christmas tree, yes. I collected a lot of ornaments, the decoration for the tree, which represented all religions, Hindu, Islamic, Christian, Muslim, Sikh as well. And I put all those things in the tree, and I topped it not with a Star of David, but I put a khanda. I, at that time, cut it out of cardboard and covered it with silver and so on. I made a pretty khanda and put that on top. So it became really not a Sikh tree, not a Christian tree, not any kind of a tree, but it became an ecumenical symbol of mankind, to my mind. That's how I presented it. It was that's the best I could do at the time. So sometimes many of these strange practices come in to burn incense in the Guru Granth and to bring the water there and coconut there and all these things. They really don't mean very much, not to me. The reading of the Guru Granth would be more important. And the Khand part that is a non-stop reading for 48 hours that nobody listens to, only the Jnani Granthis are employed to read it, and people are at home. They come for the day when it starts, start with the first 5 paudis of Japji Sahib, and then they leave, and then they come when the bhog for the Nome Malle de Shlok, and the bhog and the kirtan and the sumptuous langa. Well, may God give them more sense than money. How can I say? That doesn't sound good. Thank you.
Thank you, Uncle. I think we have one last question from Amrik Bhamra again from UK, and this may be coming from the same line of questions that he had before, and he's saying, are we not, particularly in the West, somewhat complacent? After all, our basic needs are being met rather well. How do we create that motivation, for even Granthis?
How do we to be complacent is a human trait. I procrastinate of everything in life, always done so. Not about to change now, I think. Too late for it. And there's a certain comfort in complacence, I suppose. But how do we change? Slowly but surely, small steps. Small steps. How do we make different kind of Jnanis and Granthis? How do we change them? Well, the next Granthi we have, treat him not like a gopher, but treat him well for the specialty that he brings. He brings a certain specialty that he has, which is irrelevant to most of our young people who are being raised here. In fact, most of our professionals, even not young people, he talks a language they don't understand. Many of the greybeards have grown up in the culture in India where they never really understood what was going on in the Gurdwara. They learned to sit there every day. And so what we need to do is to start the model of discussion, of presentation. Sometimes, in fact, to our Gurdwara I have proposed here, they don't have a Granthi. They had one, they fired him recently. Now they don't have a Granthi, and they bring one in for a month, and then they bring another one for a week, and so on. And they're doing the same thing, the same stories, nothing changes. So I suggested to them, why don't we make a list of 5 or 6 Granthis in town that can be occasionally called. Why don't we make a list of half a dozen people in the congregation, men and women, half a dozen men, half a dozen women, or whatever we can, who can also speak on issues, contemporary issues, interfaith issues, biological concerns, ethical concerns, and so on, and try to who will promise to relate their point of view to something from Gurbani, mini sermons kind of a thing, and have that variety going on. It will train us to learn to speak and discuss, and not just sit there listening to a Granthi with our mind wandering elsewhere, like the mind of the Qazi when Guru Nanak did not join him because he was too busy trading horses in Kabul, right? And that's what we do. And so we need to start some initiative like that, and I've proposed it, but they are reluctant to do it because that is not the way Gurdwaras are run. Around them or around in India, that's not the way they grew up. They're resistant. So you can take a horse to water, but I don't know how well can you make him drink. Your question is, how do we make the horse drink? Really, that's the essence of your question. We know what to do. We know what should change. We can take the horse to water. How can we make it drink? So next Gurdwara you go to, the next Gurdwara that you are officer of, don't just say, okay, it doesn't matter, this too shall pass, but try to make a difference. Try to make a difference.
Thank you, Uncle. I was actually wrong last time. There is one last question
Good.
from
The
Manpreet.
questions should never end. The questions should never end. They should not be. This is not a last question.
Right. And this
Never.
question is from Manpreet Jassal, who's actually sitting right next to you. But he asks, do Granthis need to be Amritdhari?
Yes. You want to know why? Now, if we recognize Guru Gobind Singh and his contribution, which was the Amritdhari way of life and other contributions too, but let's just concentrate on that, then that remains a goal. Unless we fall into the trap of many people who say, well, I believe in Guru Nanak, but I don't believe further on, or I will stop at Guru Arjan. My gurus are right there, and after that I don't. Or I will believe 8 out of the 10, but leave out Guru Hargobind and Guru Gobind Singh. And I've seen all kinds of intellectual shenanigans, but those are head games. Those are head games. If you take the total model from Guru Nanak to Guru Gobind Singh, Amritdhari, the way of life is there. When the lines say, Rani rahe soi Sikh mera, Rani doesn't mean one has got just a turban on his head and a kirpan on his side and so on. Rani is a way of life, and a way of life means living the Sikh way of life, cognizant of the teachings of the Guru Granth and of the Sikh tradition from Guru Nanak to Guru Gobind Singh. Now, if you follow that lifestyle, then don't you think the Granthi, your teacher that you have there, should represent that? I would think so. Will he occasionally fail? Well, we all do fail. I hope not too much. I teach anatomy. Sikhs may, some students may think I'm the guru of anatomy, and I may well be, but am I a perfect anatomist? Are there no better anatomists in the world? Of course there are. Do I make mistakes in my teaching? Certainly. Certainly. Sometimes even the students can point out. Sometimes they do. So don't expect a supernatural, superhuman perfection from the man, but do expect him to be able to guide us. And to be able to guide us to be a model Sikh, he would have to know some things. And being an Amritdhari would be part of that. So I put it in that kind of a perspective. That I teach, I require the qualifications and the lifestyle of what I teach. As an anatomist, if I don't have that under my belt, I don't have any business being there.
Thank you, Uncle.
Yes, sir.
We don't have any more questions from our audience. And I'd like to thank everybody who has asked questions, and our apologies if some of your questions may not have been answered, or some of the questions we didn't get to. But Uncle, would you have any closing comments?
My closing comment, you said some of the questions may not have been answered. I would like to say to you that none of the questions have been answered. Because you see, the purpose is not to answer questions. The purpose is to foster a discussion, to stir the pot a little, stir the pot of discussion. The answers are going to come from within the person, within the self, within you. Again, it reminds me, I teach anatomy. And you know what anatomists do, you dissect the body and you identify things and so on. And some of my students once complained, they went to the dean and years ago, and they said, Dr. Singh is very difficult. So why? Because he doesn't answer. We asked him, what is this structure? And instead of answering, he will pull the questions out of us, and that takes 5 minutes of discussion. And he won't just give us a straight answer. And I had to say to him that, I could rattle off 10 answers in 5 minutes. The likely result is the student will not remember anything I have said 5 minutes later, or very little of what I said. If I pull the question out of him painfully, that it is the vagus nerve, or whatever it is, and why it is what it is, it's more painful for me, it's more painful for the student. He feels embarrassed, as I have to work harder, but the chances are he will remember. And my job is to make him learn as much as his talents and inclinations allow. So am I not doing the job that you pay me for? And he said, yes. And I said to him that you ought to give me a raise. That's what it is. And you know what, that's a different story. But that is the point of a discussion. The point of a discussion is not to give you answers, because the answers here that I might give you on Sikhism would represent my bias. There's no one without bias, and my lack of learning, and there's no one with perfect learning. So that's what the answers would be. You might accept them today, you might reject them tomorrow. I would like you to think about these issues, develop your own answers, evolve them, make them your own. Make them your own. You'll live by them. And thank you.
Thank you, Uncle. We don't have any more questions. If I wanted to tell everybody on the webinar, if you do have any future questions, please do send them over to info@sikhri.org.
Yes.
And we'll try our best. We'll send the questions to Uncle, and Uncle will give us those answers, and we can present those answers back to you.
Or what will happen with me, I'll probably write an essay on the question.
Exactly. So I know Jasdeep Matharu from Fresno, California. He's asking a similar question, saying, is there going to be a forum where we can actually continue the discussion?
My pleasure. Now, I'm not a computer man. I don't know how to set these things up. You set these up. My pleasure to have a forum like this. I live for those things. Look, I came here to this country when my knowledge of Sikhism was close to zero and my interest in it a little bit less. All right? I learned what I learned by living here with people who were not Sikhs, many of the years that I spent here, and I was under questioned by many, and I had to stop and think about what am I and why I am the way I am. So I learned it that way. So I would love nothing more than a forum where we can talk about these things. Much of what I write comes out of such discussions with people. So don't be surprised if some of these things enter into or become essays of that kind. So please set it up. My pleasure. And I think Ravinder, if he's still on that site, I think that he'd be another good man to have with us. And he'll join us.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Uncle. Thank you all for attending the webinar this morning, or maybe in some cases evenings. We do appreciate your feedback. So once the webinar has ended, a window should pop up on your screens. If you can take a little bit more time, allowing us to make us more better, or when I say more better, just better, in what we do and in answering our questions, your questions, as well as continuing on with these live webinars, please go ahead and do that. Once again, thank you all for attending. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.